Sofia's fate seemed to have been sealed after a devastating accident, leaving her on the brink of the abyss, with the life she knew destroyed in a matter of seconds. But what seemed to be the end turned out to be just the beginning of a journey that no one could have predicted. Amidst the pain and loss, she found something more valuable than she could have imagined. A new purpose that would not only transform her life, but also inspire everyone around her to never give up, no matter how dark the road may seem. Are you ready to discover how human strength can overcome even the greatest obstacles? Imagine living your life in full swing, chasing your dreams, achieving your goals, feeling like you're in control of everything. And suddenly, all of that is taken away from you in a single second. That's exactly what happened to Sofia. She was a young woman full of energy, with a bright future ahead of her, and most importantly, she was about to achieve one of her life's greatest dreams. But fate, in a cruel and unpredictable way, decided to change the course of her story in a way she could never have imagined. The morning that began like any other became the turning point of her life. Sofia was on her way to an important professional event, a crucial step in her career. She was excited, her expectations were high, and her confidence was overflowing. However, the moment she crossed the street, something unexpected happened. A runaway car lost control and hit her head-on, throwing her to the ground with brutal force. The impact was so strong that her body seemed to have been crushed. An indescribable pain took over every cell of her being, and the feeling of loss of control was overwhelming. The accident was not only physical, it cut Sofia in a way she could never have imagined. When she woke up in the hospital, what she saw was not only a body marked by pain, but a shattered soul. The doctors tried to explain the damage, but their words seemed to make no sense. Her mind was in shock, trying to process what had happened, while her body, immobilized and fragile, seemed distant from her own will. But deep down, she knew that nothing would be more difficult than facing the emptiness of loss, the emptiness of what was gone, and what she didn't know if she would be able to rescue. The physical impact was brutal. Suffering multiple fractures, dislocations, and deep bruises, Sofia would need to undergo a series of surgeries to try to regain mobility. But the biggest blow was not in the visible wounds. The real weight was in the invisible scars, the ones no one can see, but which infiltrate the mind and heart. Sofia, who had once been a confident person, saw her body transform into a battlefield. The things she had taken for granted, such as walking, running, or even looking in the mirror without feeling deep despair, were now distant, almost unattainable luxuries. As the days dragged on in the hospitals, she found herself immersed in a constant battle against pain and despair. Every movement she made, every attempt to regain control, seemed to be thwarted by a cruel reality that forced her to face a new self, a self marked by tragedy. The first days were the hardest. The shock and disbelief of being in that state, in a hospital, with all her plans so abruptly interrupted, seemed unbearable. She felt as if she were adrift, without an anchor. She no longer knew who she was, or what she would become after that. But while physical pain consumed her days and nights, the emotional pain was even more unbearable. The fear of never being the same person again. The fear of losing the essence that made her who she was. The fear of no longer having a purpose in life. These thoughts began to dominate her mind. Would she be able to go back to the way she was before? Would she have the strength to rebuild her life after such destruction? Or would this be the end of her story, the last page of a book she never wanted to write? The days passed, and the world around her continued as if nothing had happened. The people who had once been so close now seemed distant, with their own lives moving on. Sofia found herself increasingly isolated, with the feeling that no one would understand the depth of her pain. She stared at the hospital ceiling and felt an overwhelming sadness, not knowing how she would be able to go back to being who she was, or even if she would be able to be anything more. It was in that moment of utter despair, when everything seemed lost, that a question echoed in her mind. What can I really control now? The answer did not come immediately, but little by little something began to change. Sofia began to realize that although the accident had taken so much from her life, it had not taken away her power to decide how she would respond to it. She still had the ability to choose what to do with her pain. And more importantly, she still had the ability to choose how to transform that pain into something greater. Although the physical impact was inevitable, the emotional impact did not have to be the end. Sofia then began to find strength in the little things: the support of her family, the affection of her friends, the determination not to let the pain define her. But the biggest challenge was just beginning. Finding a new purpose, something that made sense amid the chaos, would be the real struggle. This is the starting point of Sofia's story, the moment she begins to understand that, as much as the accident changed her life, she still had the power to rewrite her future. And if you've been following this story so far, you must be wondering, how did Sofia manage to overcome this? How did she turn her pain into a new purpose? Well, know that the answer will not be simple, but her journey will be full of surprises and discoveries that are sure to touch your heart and transform the way you see overcoming adversity. If you're feeling inspired by this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chapters of this journey of overcoming adversity. Follow the next steps in this story and discover how human strength can be more powerful than we imagine. If you or someone you know is going through a difficult time, share this video. Who knows, maybe the beginning of Sofia's journey is exactly what someone needs to hear to find their own strength. Don't miss the next part of this exciting story. The first few days after the accident were a blur. Sofia could barely distinguish the line between what was real and what her mind wanted it to be. She woke up in the hospital, the white sheets still cold, and the pain in her body was constant. A pain that gave her no respite, that she couldn't ignore, no matter how hard she tried. The doctors called her in for another surgery, another procedure to try to save what was left of her legs, her movements, her old life. But all she could do was stare at the ceiling and ask, silently, why this had happened to her. The future she had planned seemed to have fallen apart before it even began. Every day, Sofia found herself further removed from the woman she once was. The mirror reflected a distorted version of herself. Her hair fell in disarray, and the scars on her body were visible. But more than that, she felt a deep emptiness inside her. The reflection she saw was not only her scarred body, but her fragile spirit. Everything seemed to be falling apart around her, and she didn't know how to stop the fall. She wondered, is this the end for me? Will I ever be able to live again? Looking out the hospital window, people passed by her, coming and going, as if life outside continued without interruption, without regret. Meanwhile, her world was stagnant, stuck in an endless cycle of pain and fear. There were no answers, no consolation. When her friends came to visit her, she saw them, but she no longer felt part of that world. They talked about plans, about their usual routine, and she wondered, what's left for me? What do I do now? Each conversation seemed like a reminder of the abyss that was opening up in her soul, of the distance she felt from everything and everyone. The pain, more than physical, was inside her. The weight of frustration, anguish, helplessness. When the doctors cleared her to begin rehabilitation, she didn't have the strength to even imagine that she could get up one day. The idea of walking again seemed absurd. The simple movement of moving her toes, once so natural, now seemed like a monumental challenge. Each step was a reminder of what she had lost, and each attempt to do something new, something simple, made her more and more hopeless. With each failure, the shadow of doubt grew stronger. What if I never get back to what I was? She sank deeper and deeper into her thoughts, until despair became almost a constant companion. The nights were the worst. Those endless hours of insomnia, with her mind spinning, and images of the accident popping up like ghosts, making the silence even heavier. Sofia wondered if she would be able to find a way out. What would life be like from now on? How could she move on when everything around her seemed to be falling apart? The fear of losing herself, of becoming a pale and lifeless version of who she had been, consumed her. Her body was confined to the hospital bed, and her mind seemed to be trapped in the same pain. Even when the nurses tried to cheer her up with kind words, with attempts to offer some hope, she couldn't see beyond the thick fog that surrounded her. They said that recovery would be long, that time would bring healing, but nothing seemed real. Time seemed like a merciless enemy, only increasing the distance between the present and a future she no longer believed she would ever reach. Sometimes she tried to convince herself that the motivational words her friends and family said were more than just an attempt to ease her pain. They were trying, somehow, to make her see some light in the midst of the darkness. But Sofia saw no light. The only glimmer she could see was the reflection of the tears in her eyes, reflecting emptiness and hopelessness. Her thoughts tormented her even more. How can someone feel so useless? How can someone feel that their life no longer has meaning? The feeling of being on the sidelines of life grew deeper and deeper. The body that was once strong and agile was now a prison. She felt a terrible disconnect between her mind and her body. It was as if the accident had broken something much deeper than bones and muscles. Something inside her seemed to have broken too. Something she didn't know how to repair. It was in this abyss of pain and despair that she began to question her future. Can I really recover? Will I ever be able to see life with the same eyes as before? But these questions were lost in the void, unanswered. She felt lost, sinking deeper and deeper into the depths of her own mind, not knowing which direction to take, not knowing what to look for. And it was in the silence of one of those nights, when tears became her only companion, that she began to feel something, a small spark. It wasn't a great revelation, it wasn't a definitive answer, but it was the beginning of something new. Perhaps, at that moment, Sofia didn't know it yet, but her fall would not be the end of her story. She just didn't know yet that the biggest struggle would not be against the accident, but against herself, against the hopelessness that was trying to take over her life. Sofia woke up on a sunny day, the kind of sun that seemed shy, as if the sky itself felt sorry for her. She was in the hospital, as usual, but something about that day seemed different. Her body still ached, the reflection of her weakness was still visible, but a vague sense of internal movement began to emerge. Perhaps it was the fact that she was feeling the sun's rays on her face more, or perhaps it was the fact that one of the nurses smiled at her with a kindness that, for a moment, did not seem forced. Whatever it was, at that moment, Sofia realized that perhaps the weight of the pain was not eternal. It was as if the fog of despair was somehow beginning to lift. Not that the scars, limitations, and pain had disappeared, but for the first time in weeks, Sofia felt able to look beyond her own sadness. Maybe, just maybe, she could try something else. Maybe rehabilitation was not like a big event that happens all at once, but rather a series of small, painful steps. And the first of those was to look at the physical therapist and say, in a voice that was almost inaudible, "I want to try." Sofia didn't know if she really wanted to, or if she was just saying it to please everyone. But something inside her, something faint, began to stir. She wasn't ready to run marathons or dance again, but she was ready to start, even if imperceptibly. The physical therapist, Donna Alice, smiled understandingly, as if she knew exactly what Sofia needed. That's how the process began. Not with great advances or achievements, but with acceptance of limitations, and the recognition that every movement, every attempt to overcome her own body, was a victory. On the first day of physical therapy, Sofia tried to move her toes. A task that, before the accident, seemed trivial, now became a huge challenge. She concentrated intensely, hoping her body would respond. And then, as a timid response to her effort, one of her toes moved. The feeling of seeing that small movement, even if insignificant in the eyes of others, was a ray of light in her darkness. Sofia's heart beat faster. It was as if the impossible had, at least for a second, been possible. But the road was long and winding. Every day was a struggle, an internal battle. However, what began with a small movement turned into a cycle of small victories. Every stretch, every step taken within her own mind to deal with the emotional pain, helped her strengthen her spirit. She was finally beginning to realize that recovery would not only happen in her body, but also in her mind. The real challenge was not in overcoming the physical pain, but in overcoming the psychological pain that accompanied it. The guilt, fear, and doubt that were often much more intense than any physical pain. Sofia began to realize that the support of her friends and family was crucial in this process. Their presence by her side was a fundamental foundation. During their visits, she saw the love in their eyes, felt their warm hugs, and heard their words of encouragement. Her mother's voice telling her she was strong, and her brother's smile as he tried to distract her with jokes, were like a beacon in her dark night. They reminded her of who she really was when she was beginning to forget herself. But the support of others, as essential as it was not enough. Because no matter how much others loved her, it was Sofia who would have to fight the most difficult internal battles. It was she who would have to find motivation when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. She knew that the true path to recovery would be lonely at times. There was no escaping it. There was no escaping the doubts that arose in moments of silence. When the visitors left and night fell, Sofia was alone with her own fears. It was then that she began to realize something important. The power was not in comparing herself to others, in being what she was before, but in being able to accept who she was now. Each day was a new beginning. Every little bit of progress, no matter how small, needed to be celebrated. The big question was not, how can I go back to being who I was? But, who can I become from here? As the weeks passed, the process of rehabilitation, both physical and emotional, began to intertwine. When she was able to lift her arm a little higher, or take a firmer step, a sense of victory filled her heart. But at the same time, when discouragement arose, she knew her mind needed care. Dealing with emotional pain required patience, just as dealing with her recovering body did. The most difficult days were those when her mind challenged her to continue, when her body did not respond as she wanted it to. She felt exhausted, without the strength to continue. And then her mother's words came to mind. Believe me, every step is one more step. You are closer than you think. And in fact, every day she got closer. The small victories, taking a step without support, looking in the mirror and seeing that there was still strength within her, began to accumulate. And when Sofia realized it, she was beginning to feel alive again, in a way she never thought possible. She still had a long way to go, but she was moving forward. And that, in itself, was a huge achievement. The journey was just beginning. In the first months of rehabilitation, Sofia immersed herself completely in the process of physical recovery, but, as she well knew, there was an even more difficult battle ahead of her. It wasn't her body that scared her the most, but the emotional pain that overwhelmed her, like a silent shadow, which grew even longer as she tried to move forward. Even with the slight improvement in her body, her soul remained fragile, full of doubts and fears. She knew that in order to truly recover, she would need to look within and find what would motivate her to move forward. It was at this point that Sofia's life took an unexpected turn. During one of her physical therapy sessions, she was invited to join a support group for people undergoing rehabilitation from similar traumas. The idea seemed simple, a space where patients could share their experiences and perhaps find some comfort amid the chaos. At first, Sofia hesitated. She didn't know if she wanted to hear other people's stories, or if she wanted to be just another face in the crowd of people marked by pain. She was still, in many ways, protecting herself, closing herself off in her own suffering. But finally, she decided to go. She had nothing left to lose. Upon entering the room, Sofia was greeted by a diversity of faces. Some older, some younger, all with different stories, but with one thing in common: the trauma, the suffering, the pain they shared. What she didn't know was that there, she would find something that would change her life forever. there was a woman named Laura, who seemed to be the soul of that group. She had a sad but sincere smile, and a look that showed a quiet strength, as if she had learned to find beauty in the midst of the storm. Laura told her story first. She had lost the ability to walk after a car accident, but unlike Sofia, she had already accepted her new reality. She didn't see herself as a victim, but as someone who, after many internal battles, had found a new way to live. "I know how you feel," Laura said, looking directly at Sofia, as if reading her thoughts. "The pain, the fear, the doubt. It's like a weight you don't know how to carry. But one thing I've learned is that pain doesn't define who we are. It just teaches us, and somehow, it shows us who we can be." These words fell on Sofia like a gentle but powerful rain. She felt that the understanding in Laura's eyes was something no one else could offer her. It was as if the woman was speaking directly to her soul, touching a deep place that Sofia didn't know existed within her. At the end of the meeting, a strange feeling came over Sofia. She didn't know if it was gratitude or something more intense, but something inside her had changed. It was as if Laura's pain had illuminated a path she didn't yet know how to walk. In the following weeks, Sofia began to attend the support group more regularly. Each story shared there, each experience of pain and overcoming, touched her deeply. She met Marcos, a former soccer player who had lost his mobility after a fall, and Sofia, a woman who had suffered from a degenerative disease since adolescence. In each story, she could see pieces of herself, fragments of suffering that, until then, she believed to be unique. But what impacted her most was not the pain that everyone there carried, but the way they were dealing with it. Each one, in their own unique way, was facing their own personal hell, and yet was seeking a way to live with dignity and purpose. They had somehow found something beyond the pain, and, more importantly, they were all willing to help others find that same path. It was at that moment that Sofia had an epiphany. If she could find strength in listening to the stories of those around her, perhaps she could also share her story and help someone else find the same foundation she was beginning to build. Over time, the idea of helping others became the driving force behind her recovery. The empathy she found in that group was not just a form of comfort. It was a powerful tool for transformation. Sofia realized that the pain she carried did not have to be a lonely burden. Instead, she could use that pain to connect with others, to make a difference in someone's life. She began to feel, for the first time, that her pain had a greater purpose. Pain was not just a tragedy. It was a starting point, a place where true healing could begin. With this in mind, Sofia devoted herself even more to her rehabilitation process, not only for herself, but for others who, like her, needed a beacon of hope. Empathy, which had once seemed like a distant experience, now enveloped her deeply. Sofia began to open up more, talking about her own anxieties and frustrations with the group. And surprisingly, whenever she shared her emotions, she felt a sense of lightness, as if she were letting the weight of her pain slip away, little by little. Soon, she became a source of support for other members of the group. Her stories and her journey of overcoming adversity began to inspire those who, like her, were trying to rebuild their lives. She understood that by helping others, she was also helping herself. Every smile she received in response to her words of encouragement made her feel that the purpose of her pain was finally being revealed. She was no longer just a victim of tragedy. She was becoming a source of strength and hope for others. And so, slowly, Sofia's purpose took shape. Her story was no longer about an accident that destroyed her, but about the human capacity to reinvent oneself, to connect, to find strength in vulnerability. Pain, instead of being an end, became a new way of living, of helping, of rising again. It was there, in that support group, that Sofia began to understand that her journey was not just about physical recovery. It was about being the change she so desperately sought, and in doing so, she found a new path, And perhaps that path was the deepest and most important of all, the path of empathy, where pain becomes purpose, and purpose becomes light for others. Sofia began to understand, more and more clearly, that her pain did not have to be just a burden, something to be endured in silence, but something that could be used to help others overcome their own battles. The support group was just the beginning of this transformation. When she began to hear other people's stories, she realized that there was immense power in sharing, in exposing vulnerability. Pain, however overwhelming, had an invisible strength, the ability to connect, to create empathy, and above all to heal. She began to ask herself, what if I shared my experience too? What if I told my story and, in doing so, helped someone find the strength to move forward? The thought frightened her, of course. Who was she to offer advice or support when her own life was so broken? But as time went by, she realized that the simple fact of being alive, of fighting, was already something worth sharing. Her story, full of failures, defeats, and moments of pain, was also a story of resilience. She didn't have to be perfect to inspire others. She just had to be true. The first step was small. During a support group meeting, Sofia had the opportunity to talk about what she had been through. She was nervous, her hands shaking, and her voice unsteady. But as she began to speak, something surprising happened. By saying the words out loud, not only was she sharing her pain, but also freeing herself from it. Each sentence she uttered seemed to lift a weight, and as she saw the reactions of the other participants, attentive eyes, understanding smiles, words of encouragement, she felt a wave of confidence grow within her. She was being heard. She was being seen. At the end of the meeting, the words of Laura, her friend from the group, stuck in her mind. Your story is a source of strength, Sofia. By sharing it, you give us permission to be strong too. Those words echoed in Sofia's heart, creating a seed of transformation. She began to realize that by helping others, she was also helping herself. The pain, which had previously seemed like a weight that paralyzed her, now became the key to something greater. By opening up to other people's suffering, Sofia began to open up to her own healing process. But she didn't stop there. Over time, she began to expand her vision. If the group meetings helped her, perhaps she could help even more people outside the hospital. She started writing a blog, sharing her daily reflections, her ups and downs. At first, it was a personal space, a diary where she could process her emotions. But when she started receiving messages from people thanking her for her words, asking for advice, sharing their own stories of pain and overcoming adversity, Sofia realized she was creating something much bigger than she had imagined. A community. A network of people who, like her, were trying to rebuild their lives from the ruins. She began holding online meetings, where she shared her journey and listened to the stories of others. She realized how difficult it was for many of these people to talk about their own struggles. But at each meeting, what touched her most was the quiet strength that emerged when people felt safe to talk, to share. The simple act of listening to someone open up, without judgment, without rushing, became a powerful catalyst for healing. Sofia realized that her pain, far from being a weakness, was now her greatest strength. She was helping to create a space where people could be vulnerable and, at the same time, find courage. The impact of this transformation on Sofia was profound. Before, she saw herself as broken, someone who had lost a lot, and, in a way, was still lost. But as she used her pain to help others, she began to see that she was not a broken person. She was someone with scars, yes, but with a strength that came from what she had overcome. Her scars weren't just marks of suffering. They were reminders of her resilience, of the courage she didn't even know she had. Every word of support, every message she received, began to rebuild her. Self-confidence. She was rediscovering herself in every person she helped. The biggest surprise was realizing that healing was not a linear process. It was not something that happened overnight, nor even continuously. There were days when Sofia felt stronger, more inspired to continue her mission. But there were also days when the pain was still overwhelming, when doubts resurfaced, and the fear of never being fully healed haunted her. But that didn't make her give up. On the contrary, it made her even more determined. She knew that healing was not a destination, but an ongoing journey, and every step taken was a victory. Looking back, Sofia realized how her perspective had changed. The pain she carried did not define her, but strengthened her. Every time she helped someone find strength, she found herself stronger, more whole. Not because her pain had disappeared, but because she had finally understood her purpose: to transform what was destructive into something that could transform the lives of others. She discovered that by helping others rise, she was also rising herself. True healing lay in connection, in empathy, in the ability to transform pain into a source of shared strength. And so it was that Sofia gradually became not only the heroine of her own story, but a source of light and inspiration for those around her. Her journey was far from over, but she finally understood the power her pain had, the power to help create a world where vulnerability and strength coexist, where overcoming adversity is not a straight line, but a series of moments of connection, healing, and transformation. As Sofia progressed on her journey of recovery and transformation, something unexpected began to happen. The challenges did not diminish. They changed form, but they continued to arise, like waves that never ceased, always challenging her strength, her patience, and her determination. At times, it seemed as if she was being pulled back, as if life was testing how far she would really be able to go. On one of those days, she woke up, and for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like fighting. Her body was sore, her mind exhausted, and the weight of expectations, of her own path, and of the support she now offered to others seemed heavier than she could bear. The words of encouragement that had once come naturally now seemed distant. In the mirror, the reflection she saw was not that of a strong and determined woman, but of someone on the verge of giving up, with tired eyes and a heart that felt empty. Sofia remembered something Laura, her friend from the group, had said in a moment of deep vulnerability. The journey to healing is not made up of constant victories, but of moments of falling and overcoming. It is not the fall that defines us, but what we do after it. But at that moment, Sofia could not see a way to get up again. How could she continue when her strength seemed to be fading? How could she move forward when her very soul felt as if it had given everything it could? Doubts began to arise overwhelmingly. Was she really capable of continuing? Would her emotional pain ever completely dissipate? Or was she doomed to live with it forever? Sometimes it seemed that every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. She still had physical difficulties, and recovery seemed much longer than she had imagined. It wasn't just her body that was dragging. It was her mind that felt at war with itself. What Sofia didn't know at the time was that these moments of doubt, this feeling of being adrift, were a crucial part of her journey. True overcoming didn't happen when everything was fine, but when life put her on the ropes and she chose, even so, to move forward. One day, as she was preparing for another support group meeting, Sofia felt completely paralyzed by sadness. She thought about giving up. Maybe she wasn't able to help others. Maybe she wasn't the person she believed herself to be. What did she have to offer? How could she continue to help when, deep down, she no longer believed in her own words? That's when something inside her changed. Instead of running away from the pain, she allowed herself to feel it completely. She sat on her bed, alone, and began to write. Not for others, but for herself. She wrote about the pain she was feeling, about her fear of not being good enough, about the exhaustion she was carrying. And as she wrote, she began to realize something important. There was nothing wrong with being weak. There was no shame in feeling lost from time to time. Sofia's strength did not come from her ability to be unbreakable, but from her courage to allow herself to break and still continue fighting. She knew there was no magic formula for overcoming adversity. There was no moment when everything would be perfect, when challenges would suddenly disappear. But as she wrote, she realized that every little obstacle she faced, every moment of pain, every emotional setback, was actually an opportunity to grow and become stronger. True strength was not in never falling, but in getting up every time life knocked her down. With this new perspective, Sofia felt a wave of renewal, a strength that came from acceptance. She didn't have to be perfect to move forward. She didn't have to be strong all the time to be valid. She needed to be authentic, and that meant allowing herself moments of weakness. With that in mind, she decided to return to the support group, not as the savior, but as someone who was truly sharing her experience, with its flaws, ups, and downs, without hiding anything. That was the real Sofia, the woman in constant reconstruction, and she was ready to be who she was, without fear of her limitations. Obstacles continued to arise, but somehow they began to lose the power they once had over her. She understood that doubt, fear, and insecurity were, in a way, companions that would come and go, but they did not own her life, and with each fall, she began to get up stronger, more aware of her own resilience. One of the greatest lessons Sofia learned during these moments of crisis was that true strength does not come from the absence of difficulties, but from the courage to face them. She learned to look at her fears and failures with compassion, to embrace vulnerability as part of her journey, and to find beauty in the scars she carried. Strength was not in being perfect, but in being able to move forward, to keep trying, even in the most difficult moments. With that, Sofia realized something crucial. Obstacles were not something to be feared, but something to be experienced and overcome, one step at a time. She found the strength to continue, not because she got rid of her fears, but because she learned to walk with them, and that was what made her become the strong woman she was becoming. The challenges would not disappear, but now she knew she was not alone. Her journey was no longer about overcoming pain, but about learning to live with it and continuing to rebuild herself with every step, every day. And with that, she became an example of courage to others, inspiring not only with her victories, but with the way she faced her own challenges and got back up whenever she fell. After so many days of struggle and uncertainty, Sofia finally reached the turning point, the decisive moment she had been looking for. It was a quiet night, one of those nights when the silence seems to scream louder, and Sofia found herself alone in her apartment, reflecting on everything she had been through. The gentle breeze coming through the open window felt almost soft, like an embrace inviting her to stop, to think, to let life flow without haste. But instead of feeling relief, she felt something much more powerful, a deep need to make sense of her pain. She was at peace with the fact that her journey to recovery would never be linear, but she finally understood that the pain she carried was not something to be feared, but something to be understood and transformed. Until that moment, Sofia's recovery had been a constant struggle to return to who she was, an attempt to find the strength to overcome obstacles and resume her life. But that night, something inside her changed. She realized that her journey should not be about returning to who she was before, but about reinventing herself, finding new meaning in what she had experienced. Sofia remembered the support group, the many stories she had heard, and the people she had helped over time. She also thought about the transformation she had experienced by helping others deal with their own pain. What began as a simple desire to heal herself became something much greater, a desire to positively impact the lives of those who were suffering, to be a voice of hope for those who felt lost, as she had felt at the beginning of her journey. It was then that she had the revelation that would change her life. She could use her experience to help more people than she had. Imagine she could transform her pain into a source of learning and healing for others. From that moment on, what seemed to be a simple mission of recovery turned into something grand. She was no longer just trying to heal herself. She was rediscovering her purpose. Sofia finally found a new meaning for her life, and this would be reflected in everything around her. She began to realize that her true passion was not in resuming the life she had before the accident, but in doing something with the pain she carried, using it to teach, support, and inspire others. The idea of becoming a mentor to people in recovery, of helping those facing similar traumas and difficulties, came to life with force and clarity. She wanted to be the bridge between pain and healing, the beacon that helped others weather their own storms. Determined to take a step further, Sofia started a psychological and emotional support project for people who had been through traumatic accidents. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was what she had to do. Instead of turning away from pain, she began to accept it as a fundamental part of her story, a chapter that would enable her to deeply understand the difficulties of others. She began to study more about emotional rehabilitation and how trauma affects people, seeking to learn tools that would help her be a better mentor. With each step she took on this new path, she felt a renewal of energy, as if she were finally fulfilling her mission. Sofia rediscovered the joy in the simple act of listening to others, connecting with them in a genuine way, and being a source of support, not with ready-made answers, but with active listening and empathy. Every time someone shared a victory, no matter how small, she felt as if she were healing a little more too. She finally understood that her mission was not to be an expert in recovery, but to be a companion on the journey. In addition, Sofia's new passion also connected her to her own physical recovery in an even deeper way. Seeing how she herself could be an example to others, she began to be less hard on herself and more patient with herself. The pain she felt was not a burden, but a constant reminder of her strength and the human capacity to reinvent oneself. She didn't have to wait to be perfect to make a difference. She was already doing that, the moment she started sharing her story and supporting others. Over time, Sofia turned her experience into something great. She started a blog to chronicle her journey of recovery and self-improvement. The blog grew, reaching hundreds of people who were going through similar situations, and she began receiving invitations to speak at lectures and conferences. But what was most valuable to Sofia was not the applause or external recognition, but the feeling of being aligned with her purpose, of knowing that her pain now had a deeper meaning. She was no longer living in the shadow of the accident, but walking in the light of what it had taught her. The big turning point was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual evolution, where Sofia finally understood the true meaning of her journey. She was no longer chasing after what she had lost. She was building something new, stronger, more solid. And in doing so, she not only found her own healing, but also helped others find theirs. In the end, Sofia realized that the true purpose was not to overcome the pain, but to find its meaning. When she was able to look at her own story, without shame or regret, she saw that her pain had not defined her negatively, but had shaped her in a unique way, creating a woman capable of seeing the suffering of others and, with empathy and understanding, guiding them toward healing. What began as a devastating accident turned into a journey of discovery, reinvention, connection, and purpose. And with that, Sofia finally found the peace she had been seeking, not because everything had been resolved, but because she knew, now, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Sofia's journey, which began with pain, despair, and a sense of irreparable loss, turned into something much greater than she could ever have imagined. The impact her story had was not only on her, but on everyone who crossed her path. She did not become a superhero with supernatural powers, but someone deeply human, someone who, even in the face of an abyss of suffering, found the strength to get back up and move forward. And in doing so, she left a mark on the world, a mark made of courage, vulnerability, and, above all, hope. What Sofia discovered along her journey was that true strength lies not in being invincible, but in being able to get up every time life knocks us down. Her story was a powerful reminder to everyone around her that no matter how dark the path or how heavy the burdens we carry, there is always a chance to start over, to transform our pain into something greater, something that can inspire others to also find the path to overcoming. She became living proof that suffering does not have to define us, but can teach us to be stronger, more compassionate, and more resilient. Sofia became a source of inspiration, not only for the members of the support group she helped, but for everyone who heard her story and saw themselves in it. Her courage in talking about her vulnerabilities, her failures, and her victories brought encouragement to those who thought they were alone in their struggles. She showed the world that no matter how great the challenge, we are never alone, and there is always something more to discover about ourselves along the journey. When people began to open up to her, to share their own experiences of pain and overcoming adversity, Sofia felt, for the first time, that her purpose was being fulfilled. She was not only helping others to heal, she was also healing herself with each story, each smile, each word of gratitude. And that turned her own pain, which once seemed like an impossible burden to bear, into a gift. The gift of being able to touch the lives of others, of being a beacon of hope for those who were lost in darkness. Sofia's legacy is one of courage and empathy, of personal and collective transformation. She was not defined by the pain she experienced, but by the way she chose to live after it. She chose to transform her own story of overcoming adversity into a source of light for the world. From the moment she understood that by helping others, she was also helping herself. Her journey, full of ups and downs, became a story of resilience, and that story spread, touching the hearts of many people around the world. Today, when Sofia looks back, she doesn't just see a past marked by pain and suffering. She sees a woman who reinvented herself, who overcame limits, and who made a difference in the lives of others. The legacy she leaves behind is not only about her recovery, but about how we can transform our difficulties into opportunities for growth and connection, how we can give new purpose to our pain, and how, in doing so, we can inspire others to also find strength in their own struggles. Now Sofia's journey continues. She knows that life will never be a straight line, and that there will always be challenges to face. But she also knows that with an open heart and the courage to continue, she will always be able to find the next step, the next chapter. And most importantly, she knows that her story will never be hers alone. She shares it with all those who cross her path, helping them find the strength that they may not have known existed within them. If Sofia's story touched your heart and inspired you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to follow more exciting stories of overcoming adversity and transformation. Remember, pain can be a path, but overcoming it is the real journey.